Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. We are Indy investors talking Indy investing, and that is exactly what we are going to do today. I'm excited to have my guest on here, Ben Grise, and we are going to get a little bit of how wholesalers come up with their numbers for how they're buying properties, marketing properties, selling properties, all that good stuff. Because when you have such a hot market like we do right now in Indianapolis, some of the numbers out there just seem a little out of touch, but do they make sense? I don't know. We're going to dig into that today. And with that, let's get on with the show. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. I have Ben Grise here with me today. Ben, how's it going, buddy?
Going great. Got my Christmas shopping done. So didn't go to any stores this year. So Amazon's amazing when you're Christmas shopping. So just slowing down, getting ready for Christmas. How about you? How you doing?
Yeah, same thing here. So just trying to get through, just trying to finish up the year strong. So I got Christmas, New Year's. You're trying to they're shortened weeks. So I'm like, oh man, I need to get this closing in, or no, this can close in January, that type of thing. So that's what I'm going through right now. But thanks a lot for joining me, man.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we get into, I know I kind of reached out to you, and I thought you'd be a good person to do this episode with, because I had a lot of people reaching out to me and basically just saying, man, bro, how you guys need to do an episode on how wholesalers come up with their numbers. Like, how do they know what to get under contract for? How do they know what to sell it for? And a lot of times when I tell people, I'm just like, a lot of times, a lot of guys don't know what they're doing. They're just throwing numbers out there and letting it stick. But honestly, I feel like I see your guys' deals all the time. You guys have some really good deals, but I feel like you and I analyze things pretty similarly. So I'm like, I'd love to get you on here and just kind of brainstorm with you on kind of how you go about your numbers and things like that. So, but before we get into a big chunk of that'll be like kind of the main focus of the show today. Before we get into that though, I'd love to hear just a little bit about your background kind of and how you got into real estate and that type of thing, man. So just give a little bit of how you got into that and what you're doing now.
Yeah. So my background is, I went to grad school at Ball State and I got a degree in, a master's degree in education. And so I'm focused on, utilizing technology to educate. And so I got out of grad school and I got a consulting position with a lot of hospitals around the country. And so I was having to travel all over the country and train nurses and doctors and clinicians how to use their technology, for electronic medical record purposes. So I was educating them. So a big education background. And I was just having to travel nonstop. And at the same time was wanting to start a family and, just engaged to my now wife. And I knew I didn't want to live that traveling lifestyle. And so I was like, I have to discover something that I can do here locally that allows me to stay home and help my wife raise the kids that that I wanted to have in the future and have a career locally without having to travel. And so we had just bought a house and it's kind of serendipitous. I came out of Lowe's because we were getting some things to work on the house, and there was a business card on my car, and it was like, make money in real estate, and did a Google search on the company, discovered Bigger Pockets, started educating myself through Bigger Pockets, and it just snowballed from there. And fast forward 7 going on 8 years later, that's where I am now. Everything that just the education and the learning has snowballed to where we are today. And today I own and operate Ben buys Indy houses which is our acquisition brand. That's the brand we use, similar to Simple Quarters, to acquire properties, and then similar to Simple Wholesaling, my wholesaling or disposition brand. What we use in the industry, dispositions, is Invest with Ben, and now I'm operating that company. And so now we do a mixture of wholesaling, selling retail. I buy and hold. So I've added several doors to my buy and hold portfolio over the past 7 years. We do owner financing. And so we do a little bit of everything in regards to residential. We focus on residential properties here and there. We'll come across the commercial deal, but it's a fraction of a percent compared to the residential that we do.
Yeah. So awesome. No, you guys have a great business. Love working with you guys, the deals we've done or even just talked about and helped each other with and stuff like that. So really have a lot of respect for you, Ben, and what you guys
Thank
do.
you.
So thanks a lot for joining me on here and stuff. And so one of the things I want to talk about too, just so you've always like just focused on the Indy market and stuff, correct? So why well, I know you've done some outside of Indy a little bit and stuff, but so why do you think Indy is such a great market for? So with your invest with Ben. So when you're talking to investors about you should invest in Indianapolis. It's a great market. It can do this for you and things like that. What's some of your kind of elevator pitch along with that of why is Indy such a great place for people to invest and why you invest yourself in Indy?
Well, I think Indianapolis is, I feel lucky to be in Indianapolis as a real estate investor. I think Indianapolis has something to offer to every type of investor, whether you want to flip houses or you want to buy and hold for cash flow, or you want to buy and hold for the tax benefits and appreciation, or you want to owner finance, it has something, or you want to wholesale, you're new to the business, you want to wholesale. So as far as residential real estate investing, Indianapolis has it has something to offer for every investor. Well, some people may be saying right now, well, isn't that every market? Well, I mean, Indianapolis compared to say Southern California, San Diego, Los Angeles, you're probably going to have a hard time, not saying it can't be done, but there's always exceptions to the rule, but you're going to have a hard time investing in single family housing in San Diego and generating cash flow, right? Because the mortgage, the taxes, all of those expenses are going to eat up your cash flow every month if you're a buy and hold investor. So you can come to Indianapolis, buy and hold, and build a great cash flowing rental portfolio just due to the affordability of housing in Indianapolis. So I think Indianapolis, from a large market, I think I read somewhere, this was a couple years ago, that out of the this was several years ago, so don't quote me on this, but out of the 20 largest markets in population in the country, Indianapolis is top 5 for affordability on housing. So when you have that affordability, that opens up opportunities to every investor, if you ask me.
Yeah. So no, that's a great point. It's the same thing. That's what we tell everybody. And that's where I really look at it too, of just so I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio, and I just kind of always compare Indianapolis to Columbus in the last 6 years that I've been out here and stuff. And I think Columbus has had a higher, appreciation, but they've almost to the point of where it's not as affordable as what Indianapolis is now and stuff. So just the affordability, like you said, is just, I think it's the biggest reason, and just being able to do multiple strategies and things here in Indianapolis is fantastic. So, all right. So let's get into a little bit now of kind of what we were just kind of talking about. What we really wanted to kind of focus this show on was you started your business and kind of built your business around the wholesaling model, and then have branched out from there. But let's kind of go back into that wholesaling thing. Same with us. What I'd really like to dig into is just how wholesalers kind of come up with their numbers of what we're pricing properties at, what we're trying to get them under contract for, buy them at even, and then just sell them at. So let's talk about first of just getting them under contract. So what are some things that you do when you are trying to price a property, trying to figure out what you really want to get it under contract at? Because all of us, our goal is always it's not just to make money. It's not just to get a property under contract. It's to help the seller out, help us out, and then help the end buyer out as well. Keeping all three of those things basically cohesive as we're doing this. So when you're talking about getting that property under contract, Ben, what are some things you guys do to kind of help analyze that deal?
Sure. So if you're price when you're acquiring a property, we all know this. If we're competing against other investors in the market, what you can pay has a big influence on whether or not you're going to convert that negotiation into a contract. Now, with that being said, it's not the end all be all, right? There's a lot of things that go into converting a seller appointment, right? So, but price is important, right? So, usually sellers want to get as much as they can for their property. So, for us, similar to you, we spend a lot of money every month to generate appointments with sellers, right? And for that reason, we have to get a return on that investment, on that marketing. And so if we're going to do that, what impacts what we can pay, right? Well, ultimately, we have to come up with the exit strategy. So we're starting with the end in mind usually. So we don't just follow a basic formula every time, 70% rule, that we all learn about, 75. Now those formulas 100% do apply, but not always. It depends on what the exit strategy. So if we know we're in a competitive situation, we're like, okay, what exit strategy, whether it be buy and hold, which we can do, buy it and then resell it on the retail market, buy it and wholesale it, buy it and owner finance it, right? Usually, to keep it simple, 4 different exit strategies. So we're looking at all of those exit strategies and we're identifying out of these exit strategies, which ones apply to this house. Well, this house is not one that we think we want to own or finance. Cross that one off. This is one that we're not willing to hold on to long-term. Cross that off. Okay, so we've narrowed it down to, and this is not one that we think any other investors are going to look at it as a rental property. We're not just thinking about what we think the exit strategy is, but we're thinking about our clients. Is this a great buy and hold? Now, there are some cases where a lot of houses fit both, right? But not always, and not always. So we're trying to identify the exit strategy that we think would work for ourselves, or for if we're going to offer it to our clients for them. So we start with that. And then from there, once we identify that exit strategy, we have different formulas, metrics that we're looking at to determine what we can pay, because ultimately we're trying to get to the highest offer we can get so that we can compete against you and all of the other investors we're competing with, usually on every deal. So that's what we start with. And then, if you want me to go into, like, for example, I can.
Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you give us an example, kind of how you, maybe one of the formulas that you use to kind of get into that and try to figure out what that price would be for you guys.
Sure. So let's just say it's a textbook, there's not going to be a lot of buy and hold investors looking at this house as a rental, just because it's going to cash flow negatively, right? You might have the exception of the investor that's not worried about cash flow. Most investors don't want to be negative cash flow on their properties. I don't mind negative cash flow because I'm not buying and holding to as an income, right? Yeah. So, but most investors are not going to buy and hold if they're having negative cash flow. Most of them. So let's just say it's a house that fixed up is worth $400,000 or $350,000, right? So the number one thing, the first thing you have to identify, I tell my acquisition team, if this house is clearly a house that needs to be rehabbed, then we have, and it makes sense to flip it, right? Doesn't make sense as a buy and hold, but it makes sense as a flip. We have to be able to identify an after repair value. Yeah. So we go into every appointment knowing what that after repair value is. You can get on the MLS, and if this circles back to determining what you can pay. If you're trying to make offers on houses, you need to have access to the MLS. So I'm a licensed broker. I have access to the MLS, right? So that's number one. That's huge, is having access to the MLS. Let me plug my computer in real quick because it's
Yeah.
about to die. Just
Yeah, no
one
problem,
second.
man.
Sorry about
Go
that.
for it. So, yeah, and I think it's a big thing of what, kind of Ben's talking about here is I really like what he said of knowing that you can basically going back to the beginning of
Oh,
knowing,
yeah.
like I was just going back to kind of what you said before. I really I want to point that out of going back, like starting from the end and then kind of working it backwards. So that's one of the best
Yep.
ways to analyze that deal of knowing like, what could somebody do with this? What price would they pay for it for what they want to do with it? Okay, now I need to, let's take my fee off of there or take off rehab, and you figure out your numbers, you work those backwards to figure out really what that price would be to really get them on their contract at. So, and what you'll see is there are some wholesalers out there and some people trying to do this, and a lot of them are new and they just don't know, or they've been taught wrong, or I shouldn't say wrong, but they maybe haven't had the experience, or maybe they've been, taught by some different people. But if you just have like somebody just getting in property under contract and then just marking up, oh, okay, I'm just going to mark this up 20,000, 30,000 each time. By having conversations with them, you're going to kind of understand about how they came up with their numbers and how legit they really are and stuff. So I'd say for our listeners out there, just don't get, don't worry about it, or don't get frustrated when you see, oh man, this deal doesn't make sense. Yeah, not every deal makes sense for every investment, and that's what's going to happen all along. So, but Ben, let's just kind of go back to you, what you're talking about of, that situation where I've really kind of pinpointed of what they want to do, figuring out what that ARV is, and then working it from there.
Sure. And I will say, like, for those listening that are new, right? You're a new investor. You're trying to learn how to make offers on properties, or this circles back to, tips for investors that are trying to decide what they can pay you and, me and Brian when we send a property out, is don't get discouraged. Like, what would you say, Brian, in your opinion, is the biggest learning curve when somebody is trying to buy a house? Like, I mean, what would you say is the biggest learning curve when you're trying to teach somebody what they can pay for a house?
Yeah, just analyzing the deal, I think, is the biggest thing, and having that experience. It comes with experience. It comes from experience from others as well, of learning from them, figuring out, and then honestly too, you're going to make mistakes in that. So that's some of the things that you're going to learn from. It's going to take time. It's going to take years. It's going to take experience. But I'd say that's the biggest thing with the learning curve of trying to figure out how that actual analyzation piece, and then also going with that, how many times we've had experience doing this. We've done it multiple times.
Yeah.
We still make mistakes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, by far, I would agree. That's what I was getting at. Like, the biggest learning curve is the actual, people say analysts. I use the term underwriting, whatever you want to call it. Analyzing or underwriting the subject property that you're looking at buying, and learning how to do that. You can't just, you can't just take the 75% rule and apply it to every property. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't. I wish it did, because it would make our job so much easier, but it doesn't. So it takes experience, right? It takes a lot of practice, and experience to learn how to properly underwrite a property. And like you said, we're not perfect. Like, we still make mistakes. We still miss things in rehab, and we overprice a property and we have to reduce it, or we buy properties and we lose money. If you guys are listening, you buy enough properties, you're going to eventually lose money on deal. And I know Brett had to teach me this, or he didn't teach me, but he made the point. Well, if you're not losing money or breaking even, like, we've lost tens of thousands of dollars on deals. We've broke even. We've closed deals where I haven't made any money. If you're not doing that, then you're probably missing out on opportunities because you're being so conservative.
Yeah. So that was one of the first lessons that kind of, as Brett and I were doing the transition of just kind of looking at the numbers of like knowing where we were, because I would get super frustrated when we would lose money on a deal or break even or something like that. And he said, if we're not doing that, we're not taking enough risk. We're not looking at deals the right way. Because that's just going to happen as you go through this and things. So I would say too, another tip that had been put in there of like, so he's a licensed agent. So myself and like multiple people on our team and things. So we have access to the MLS. We have access to those comps. I would really say if you do not have access to the MLS, you have access to comps, pick two other sources, not just one source and use that, but pick two other sources that you understand and you can learn from and you can grow from. but pick two things that you can kind of go with and use both of those to look at comps. So maybe use PropStream and Zillow together. Don't use just one of them, but kind of use them together, try to figure them out how that works and stuff like that. So that's one of the tips with that. If you don't have MLS access to be able to look at comps and things, I definitely recommend just pick two things. Just don't use one of them and go with it. But I'm kind of use two of them together. So Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, that brings me back to my next point, or to what I started this off with is, you have to have access to MLS. Otherwise, you're not going to reliably, confidently determine ARV on some of these houses, right? Sometimes PropStream and Zillow will work depending on the neighborhood. But you may come across a house where there's not enough data on PropStream or reliable data or Zillow to determine that ARV, right? So, and, other resources, Brian, could be you and I reach out to somebody like us. And instead of, trying to do everything on your own, reach out to somebody with more experience, leverage their knowledge to help you help you get the deal closed, right? Because 50% of something of a deal is better than 0% of a deal. So not converting.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I actually just had a wholesaler reach out to me the other day, and he just said, "Hey, I'm really struggling, and I don't have any deals of my own to really kind of analyze right now." And he's like, "Do you mind just going through maybe 3 of your deals and analyzing with me of it?" Like, yeah, I'd love to do that. Like, that's awesome. And then he even gave me feedback of so why did you get this? And that's a good question. I really didn't look at it in the full way. So it's always good to kind of do that kind of stuff.
And I'd say then too, when we're tips for, we're kind of talking about tips for wholesalers, tips for investors, just investors that aren't wholesalers are looking to acquire properties at discount. I always like to say, don't rely on the wholesaler, whether it's me or Brian, to determine the ARV for you. I mean, we put the ARV out there and we share comps with our buyers, but I want you to determine the ARV either through an independent third party. Maybe you have an agent in the market that you trust, right? That is not incentivized to sell you the property that I'm trying to sell you. And you say, hey, Ben, Invest with Ben sent this deal out. They have the ARV at 100,000. Here are the comps they sent me. Can I rely on these comps? And ask that independent third party. And if not, well, why not? Why don't these comps work? If so, oh, okay. Why do these comps work? So, you have to have some sort of, if you don't have access to MLS as an investor here in Indy on your own, make sure you have somebody that you can rely on that's not incentivized to determine the ARV on the subject property you're looking at. So
I think that's one of the most frustrating things that you can hear from an investor, whether it's in-state, out-of-state, whoever, when they say, oh man, I bought this deal and the wholesaler said the ARV was this and it didn't get appraised for this, or the wholesaler said the rehab was it. I'm like, why are you listening to wholesalers? I don't want them listening to me. I do feel pretty confident in my numbers of what the ARV would be or what the rehab would be, and what we I pay people to come up with those numbers and figure those things out, but don't trust them, don't believe me, and don't hold me to those. Run your own numbers, make sure it makes sense to the investor yourself and your team and what you want to do and your long-term plan and stuff. So I think that's really important.
Or even if you do trust, right? Let's just say you trust us, you trust Brian, you trust us, but you need to verify too, because we do make mistakes. And not to mention, there are houses that the ARV is determined by your level of rehab.
Yeah.
Right. So if we say ARV is 200, but you don't put the rehab that pulls 200, so that brings me to my next point. On a flip property, rehab is key, right? We can make offers. All we need is ARV and rehab. Yeah. We know the ARV and we can run a repair estimate and we like to be within, give or take, 10 to 15%. And so when we're offering, we have a cushion in there, right? We have, if we say the rehab's 50, we have a cushion in there, or at least we try to, right? Have a cushion, because what if the rehab bunch of change orders and the rehab comes back at 58, right? you better have factored in that 8,000, because that could eat 8,000 into your profit. So how we determine for flip properties, we only need those two metrics. And then basically what we do is we start with the ARV, then we plug in the expenses to sell, right? And I don't want to get too detailed, but you have realtor commissions, you have closing costs, and you can factor in taxes, transfer taxes or prorated taxes, right? You have holding costs. So we start with the rehab. How much as a flip does our investors, have they proven that they want to make on the property? Do they want to make 10% of the sale price? Do they want to make 15? Some investors, they tell us, you know, I'm trying to make 20% on this flip off of the sale price. And, you know, they haven't bought too many properties from us right now, because this brings back our market right now. There are investors out there willing to only make 8 to 10% on the flip because inventory is low. They're having trouble finding inventory. So if they want to stay in business, they got to accept lower profit margins. So markets change, the margins are willing to change. So we just start with the end and then back into it. We subtract out the expenses, the repairs, the holding costs, closing costs, and then if we come out at, let's just say, the price is 60 for our investor, we're confident our investor buy at 60, then we start our negotiation based on knowing we can selling it, the end goal, selling it at 60. And so, you know, a lot of times I would say if you're using the 75% rule in this market and you're able to acquire properties using the 75% rule, which is purchase, sell price. So if you can sell it for 200 times 0.75 minus repairs equals what our investors will buy from. If you can get properties using that formula for flips, you're going to have no problem selling them if you're using the 75% rule. Yeah. Now, the thing is sometimes, depending on the house, the 80% rule works because some investors are okay making 10% rather than 15. So
yeah, and it all depends on the market and how much inventory there is. And I think it's a really good thing that you brought up there, Ben, of for your investors to know too, of like kind of where they are at their numbers. Are they willing to sacrifice, 5% here or 3% or whatever it may be, because they need to keep their crews happy and just get another project going and some of those things. So there's a lot of stuff to consider along with that. So, so then, I mean, yeah, best case scenario, but kind of like what you said too, like the general thing of being able to work it backwards. I think that's the main thing of being able to work it backwards to come up with those numbers makes sense. So if your end buyers are going to want to buy it at, 70% or 75%, where do I need to buy it at? Where do I need to be? I need to be at 55%, 60%, somewhere around there. So my investor can still be right where they need to be on that back end and stuff. So, and
how much are you okay making too?
Yep.
And so,
yeah.
And
yeah, go ahead.
So that's how much are you okay making? How much you have to know your client, know your investors. What are they okay? I will share, like, if you can acquire in this market today, if you can acquire properties using the 75% rule and be accurate on your ARV, so if the ARV is accurate and the repairs are accurate, then that's a great deal in this market. Well, some investors, they want to make 20, well, there used to be the day, do you remember the 70% rule?
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So, I mean, so if people are looking, the investor has to decide what they're okay making with. But I can tell a lot of wholesalers, if you're listening, if you can acquire properties and reliably know that your 75% rule, you made the offer based on that, is accurate, you're going to have no problems finding an investor to buy that from you.
Yeah.
And if you do have a problem, then contact one of us and we can help you. But yeah. I'm just saying, like, a lot of people don't, but everyone tells, a lot of people start out, they say, I don't have any buyers. And I always tell them, it doesn't matter. Find a good deal.
Yeah.
You're going to have no problems finding a buyer. in this market.
Yeah,
so,
in this market, especially right now. So, and I thought that was going to be the opposite when all this COVID stuff hit. I honestly thought it was going to be the exact opposite, where we would have a lot of deals and the buyers would be a little bit scarce just because they weren't sure what was going to happen to their money in the market and everything like that. It actually the exact opposite happened. So
I thought
that's
the
where we
same
are.
thing.
Yeah.
I thought the same thing.
Yeah. So Ben, let's look at the opposite. So we kind of, put some tips in there for just kind of wholesalers and things like that. Let's talk about it from the investor side. So when investors are looking at wholesaler deals, what are some things maybe some tips for them or some things they should consider when they are looking at a wholesaler deal and trying to figure out like whether whether the wholesaler's numbers make sense or anything like that? What's some tips you have for investors on that side?
I think that circles back to when I said, like, don't rely on the wholesaler's numbers, right? I mean, unless you just have a tremendous track record with them, they never make mistakes on their rehabs. They never estimates. They never make mistakes, and nobody's perfect. But like, if you're okay, don't rely on the wholesaler for their numbers. That's where you trust their numbers, but then you also verify them.
Yeah.
Right. So that would be the biggest thing, is just having, whether if it's yourself, verify the numbers on your own if you have access to the technology, which you can determine rent rates very easily by getting on Rent-A-Meter, getting on Zillow, and looking and seeing what rentals are being leased at in the area. And if using an agent to help you verify the ARV, and then having a reliable contractor. If you can't determine the repair estimate on your own, have a team, a contractor that you can rely on to determine the repairs. So that would be the biggest piece of advice, is like, these are just essentially numbers on paper when you see a wholesale deal. You need to take the time to do your due diligence and verify that based on these numbers, the deal still works for you, I would say.
Yeah. And I like that word of just verifying. A lot of times I love it when investors reach out to me and be like, hey, how did you get your numbers here? And I just have that conversation with them and talk them through them. They're not just taking it and, okay, Brian said the ARV is this and rehab's this and blah, blah, blah. But they're just calling me and it's a 5-minute conversation. Yeah, this is how I came up with my numbers, or jumping on Zoom and showing them doing a screen share and saying like, yeah, this is how I came up with it. Okay, that makes sense, and going into that way and stuff. So like you said, just verifying the numbers it goes a long way.
Yeah, we used to put a repair scope and a repair estimate on every one of the deals that we marketed. And then we learned, like, every investor is different, right? You keep saying that, but some investors locally that have been in the business for 20 years that buy houses from us, they're experienced investors. Yeah. They have access to contractors that a lot of investors that haven't been in this market for 20 years and they're out of state don't have access to.
Right.
So it may cost this investor $2,000 to paint the house, and it may cost you $4,000, right? Because of the relationships that investor has built and the access to contractors. Yeah. So the rehab is going to be different for everybody too. Only you as the investor know what your labor costs are with your contractor. We as the wholesaling company don't. So, yeah. And I will say for us, like, we try to price the property. If we're selling it off market, we try to price the property at a discount to what we could sell it for retail. Because I believe, like, if we're selling it off market, we're saving in expenses from retail. Right. We're saving in holding costs. I'm saving in costs with my lenders. I'm saving in realtor commissions. And so those costs of selling retail get passed off. Those expenses we take off, and we pass the savings on to our off-market buyers. So, if we have a property that, let's just say we send out at 50 to off-market discount, chances are if we don't sell it that way, then it's going to be listed at a higher price because of the increased expenses. So if we have a property we're selling off market, then we try to sell it at a discount. And so that's just kind of what we do when we're selling off market.
Yeah, I got one last little tip in that, and then I got one more question for you, Ben, before we get you out of here. So my last little tip with that with the investors of being able to work with other wholesalers is everything's negotiable. Just talk about prices. Ben has a property at $50,000 he puts out there, but I know, oh man, this only makes sense for me at 45. Throw out that offer. He might not take it, but he might. And I would just say that too. I've seen I've worked with enough wholesalers that they might throw out a property and say, hey, I want $100,000 for this property, and I'm like, sorry, I can't do that price. And they're like, oh, I'll just make an offer. I'm like, $40,000. Oh, can you do 45? Like, we just came down $60,000. Like, that's literally happened before. So knowing kind of where your numbers are and where you need to be, stick to your numbers and negotiate and just throw out offers. And at least the worst thing that can happen is they say no. You're not going to get that deal anyway at the price that they want. So that's just a little tip in there.
Yeah. Stick to I would tell the investors that are looking at deals that are off market, stick to your numbers, like you said, and don't think that you're going to offend us. No. Right? Like, we get so many offers on properties. We're not going to be offended if your offer is lower than our asking. Not trying to incentivize you to offer lower than asking. Our model is we have an offer deadline and we accept all offers. Well, that has upset some investors. They want special treatment, I guess you could say. And those investors have missed out, because had they made we've had investors offer our asking price, and we say the offer deadline is this date. We're going with the highest and best offer. We always go with the highest and best. Sometimes the highest and best offer isn't always the asking price.
Yeah.
So had they said, yeah, I'll stick with your asking price, and they would have gotten that deal, but they removed their offer because they don't want to make a competitive offer.
And that's something too, is make sure every wholesaler works differently. Everybody operates differently. So having the conversation too of, if you want to work with wholesalers, you have your pool of wholesalers that you're looking at their deals, make sure you have conversations with them off of, hey, how do you guys handle this? Or, what is your strategy here? Or, what's the best way to work with you? Have those conversations, because, if you send me an offer, I'm going to treat it a little differently than the way Ben handles it, or the way Will handles it, or Clay, or whoever. We all operate a little differently. So having those conversations it really goes a long way, and just developing those relationships, but then knowing too, how do I put my best foot forward and put my best offer in for how they operate? So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Ben, before we get you out of here, I do want to just kind of just give you a second to just kind of talk about, so we kind of focused on the kind of your wholesaling thing and stuff like that, but what are some other strategies that you're really using right now that you think would stand for the test of time a little bit, or doing really well here in Indianapolis that other investors might not think of, or something that you're really a strategy that's working for you that maybe another investor can pick up as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of properties that we don't end up wholesaling, and we hold on to them either as rental. A lot of investors are familiar with rental properties, but we do owner financing too. And what that means is, I'll buy a property, and then we will sell it on financing to an owner occupant, or even investor too. We will sell to investors as well. So we're basically providing the financing for the buyer. So, and what that does is, when you're offering financing to somebody versus selling the property, say, hey, Brian, I'll sell the property for you for cash, or hey, Brian, I'll sell the property for you on financing. You can usually, and if you're an investor and you want to buy properties and resell them for a higher price, if you don't need a lump sum of cash for your investing strategy, why not sell it on financing? Because there's two benefits to it. You can sell a property on financing for a premium, and then also you can generate interest on the price you're selling it for. So you're generating interest on the sale price, and you're selling it at a premium to what you could get selling it for cash. So and we get those monthly payments from our buyers every month, and it's just, they're owners of the house. They're not tenants. They actually own the house, and it's consistent monthly passive income.
I love it. I love that
Without
strategy.
having to deal with, I love it because my personality, you might be similar, but like my personality is, you know, I'm just not good. I like to self-manage all of my buy and holds are self-managed with the exception of one. It's a commercial property, but I like I like to self-manage. And so I'm very, very picky on the type of property I want to hold on to. I want to try to get the best tenant I can get.
Yeah.
And so this enables you to, offering owner financing enables you to sell some lower priced properties without having to be a landlord.
Yeah.
You don't have to fix the toilet when it breaks. You don't have to change the furnace filters, clean out the gutters. You don't have to maintain the property at all because the owner is maintaining the property for you in exchange for the financing and them having the opportunity to own a home.
Yeah. And you are the bank. You have those monthly payments coming in just like you would rent, only there's interest tacked on top of that. So
Exactly.
yeah, that's a great strategy. I know we've had, you know, conversations about that as we both kind of work that strategy, and it works out great. So something I think everybody should look into a little bit because I think it's a really great thing, especially now too of just like the amount of people just in general that are now entrepreneurs. They don't have that typical, you know, they can't provide proof of income like they can get that traditional mortgage. That's happening more and more. And stuff like that. So there are more people that need owner financing or need to buy through strategies like this. So great stuff, Ben. Really appreciate you. Thanks a lot for joining me today. And with that, if somebody wants to reach out to you, they have more questions or just want to get in contact with you, what's the best place or best thing for them to do?
I would say visit our, if you're an investor, whether it be a wholesaler, buy and hold, you're a passive lender, you flip houses, I would say go to investwithben.com, and we have our contact information on that website, and you can reach out to us and we can talk to you about the opportunities we provide no matter what your investment strategy is.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if you need anything from me, if you have any questions, any input on the show, or have just say, hey, I wish they'd do an episode on this, shoot me an email at brian@simplewholesaling.com, and I would be more than happy to help you out. And with that, that's a wrap for this episode. We will see you guys next time on the Indy Investor Pod. Take care.